After turning the corner and standing in front of the female that was apparently so scared she couldn't move, I looked forward, and down the hall, barely 20 or 30 meters in front of me, was something or some things. Its claws seemed to be wrapped around the bulkhead. The body seemed to be far too big for the hallway that it was standing in. I stood there just confused. What the hell was I looking at? Its strange, kind of narrow face turned towards me. I didn't say a word. The male, however, I could feel shake in my arms, and then suddenly start to desperately grasp at the side of the hallway, trying desperately to pull himself away from me. I just let him go and let him fall down into the other intersection of the hallway. The female was still behind me, though I didn't even realize it yet, as she was completely paralyzed in fear of this thing. I looked at it, I looked at him, and that's when I turned and looked at her, and she was still staring at it, still scared, so much so that I started to smell ammonia. I didn't have time to worry about it, though, as I heard something which immediately drew my attention back to this thing. Apparently there was more than one, and it began to clamber its way down the hallway, and it came towards us, not at a high rate of speed, no, but seemed to be trying to methodically work its way through as to not beat itself against the reinforcements on the end of the hallway. The metal beams that seemed to stick out all over the place, which were usually associated with blast doors, yet they were not shut, seemed to be something of a cumbersome thing for this, whatever in the hell it was, to get around. Immediately, I drew my pistol, charged it, and raised it, waiting for this thing. I yelled at it, "Back off!" I still to this day have no idea why I said that, as this thing simply stopped, looked directly at me instead of her, and then opened its face to show rows and rows and rows of teeth in every direction. I remember seeing a type of sea creature like this, with all this type of sharp teeth that seemed to be almost like hooks, something that if this thing got its grips on me, I was totally screwed. And if this thing did a death roll like a crocodile, it would take a limb off of me fairly easily, however extremely painfully. It wouldn't be clean like a croc or a gator. No, this thing would rip and tear every fiber one by one as it whipped me around, but I wasn't going to give it a chance. As its maw opened, I began to fire 1, 2, 3 rounds at a time, constantly firing. This thing seemed to suddenly stop. And then as I fired again, it screeched a little bit, but it was almost like a gurgle. And then it dropped. Just dropped right there. I looked, what the hell? The hell was this thing? I looked, and I wasn't out of ammo, so I walked up to it, kicked it, put the weapon next to its neck, and fired again. Point blank range made the bullet go clean through into its neck. It didn't even shudder. I looked over at the female. She was still frightened of this thing. I kicked it again to make sure it was down. And as I walked up to the female to see if she was okay, I looked around the corner and I saw 2 other men running in my direction, one holding a knife and the other one trying desperately to assemble the rifle that he had inside his bag. They started asking me questions. What the hell were you shooting at? I showed them, and immediately the one with the rifle almost dropped his pieces. What the hell was that? I don't know. The hell? Do you think I know what's going on? I mean, seriously, look at these things. As I motioned towards the female, still stoic like a statue. Look, hey, lady, hello, hello. I waved my hand in front of her face. Hello, hello. Nothing. Finally, I just said, screw it, and slapped her across the face. That seemed to bring her out of her stupor. She then looked at me, looked at the creature on the ground, looked at all of us as we stood there speaking a language she didn't understand. She was like, just confused. The man who was around the corner, still clutching his leg, trying desperately to stand back up, was seemingly yelling at her in that language we didn't understand, but it didn't matter. This thing, whatever it was dead. And they were okay, but Seriously, what was going on? Both of the men that were coming up started rubbing their eyes as they were still trying to shake off the sleep that they had just come out of. We started talking about what the hell they had seen, and all they knew was that different types of creatures, not just the demon-looking things that with me, but some sort of dog-shaped person was also helping, and there was another one they saw was, well, I don't know really what to call it. Was it reptilian? Was it avian? Was it an amalgamation of both? I couldn't tell, nor did I really give a crap at that point, because at that point we heard something screech down the hall. A slow screech, deep and low. We turned to look, and sure enough, another one of these things had come up, and it was seemingly sniffing at the body, motioning at it. At that point, you heard all three of us simultaneously go, "Oh shit." Another one just looked at me and said, "I think you killed its mate." That was when I looked at my pistol, realizing the hammer was still back. I was like, "Care to help?" I moved off to the side, raising my pistol up. He raised his rifle, and I heard the safety click off. We waited. I told him to hold fire until this thing opens its mouth. Apparently its brain is right behind its mouth. And we didn't have long to wait. This thing looked at us, heard us talking, and began to come towards us. We began to fire straight into its mouth, and only a few rounds later, down it went. And with that, I dropped the magazine, grabbed a fresh one, swapped them out, and slammed it in place with a click. What the hell was going on? With that, we turned around and saw that the female had frozen up again. She was still frozen. I was like, "What the hell, lady?" Putting the hammer back in and putting my pistol back in, I walked up, grabbed her, picked her up, and then walked her back to where the male was and sat her down. And with that, she was still basically comatose. She was completely out of it. She wouldn't move. It was strange. So I slapped her across the face, this time a lot harder. I almost thought I broke something, the way her head snapped to the side. But then again, they gave me the same courtesy. We started to ask what the hell was going on. What were those? We motioned. What is that? And they couldn't give us an answer. They continued to speak in that strange language. And finally, one of the men reached over, grabbed me on the shoulder, and said, "Tell you what, just 1 second." He motioned to both of them and then towards the hallway. And then gave the universal shrug that we know. I think they got it, as they both got up. This time the male able to walk a little better, as it seemed like his ankle was beginning to heal a little faster. They moved up, but this time they didn't turn the direction of those monsters, but instead turned in the other direction and continued to move. We made sure we were close by as we made our way down the hallway. Eventually, we saw an area that we remembered. It was our briefing room. We passed by. How in the hell? What the hell's going on? And with that, the whole room shook again. This time, it wasn't violent enough to knock us off our feet, but it was enough to make us steady ourselves. Okay, earthquake? I looked around, and both of the guys were like, "Oh." One of them, the one only holding his knife, said, "That doesn't feel like one. I grew up on the West Coast. That does not feel like a quake." Well, great. Wonderful. Now what's going to happen? Before we even got another 10 steps, we heard more running coming up behind us. Both me and the one with the rifle actually turned and drew up on that area, thinking that we were going to be overrun by a couple more monsters, but instead, several more humans and several more not so much humans turned the corner and looked at us, many of them freezing in place as they realized we were about to shoot them. But without a moment's hesitation, we quickly lowered our weapons and started saying hi to everybody. About a half a dozen women and another 2 men were making their way forward. We were just simply confused what was going on. Nobody had any answers, but we continued to follow the not-so-human ones as they led us past the briefing area and more towards well, the entrance. We thought they were going to be taking us outside. And when we finally got to the blast doors, they went to try and figure out how to open it. We all looked at each other, and then one of the women simply walked up and pressed the open button. And sure enough, the blast doors moved to the side. It was something else to see that there was still power here, which wasn't to be unexpected, considering every single pod had its own power supply. If you didn't damage the pod or its power supply, the thing would run pretty much indefinitely. And we figured it was the same thing for every small section here. Every room probably had its own 0-point generator just to operate everything. At least that way, it's easy to swap out and you don't have to worry about a single power supply going out and killing everyone. As we made our way past the blast doors, we thought we would be walking out into the daylight, or maybe out into the darkness of night, but no. We were in a hangar. A massive hangar. What the fuck was all you heard from anyone? As we began looking around, we were motioned to come with those that were not quite human towards an area, towards a ramp. We followed them down the ramp, but as we did, suddenly crash behind us. As we turned, we saw another one of those things, but this one was a lot bigger. But now it was facing over a dozen weapons. We turned immediately and fired straight into its face. I didn't think that the bullets would be able to break through its skin, but straight through they went, straight through the mouth and straight through the brain. If that thing was lined up, they would have gone straight from the brain and out its ass. Jeez, these things, for being so scary, they seem to be pretty weak. I mean, seriously. What the hell? Those that were not quite human started screaming and squawking at each other. And we looked and they were clearly petrified. But they were almost more scared of us now. I looked at my pistol, put the hammer back, and again followed them down. And eventually we got to an area that we thought might be safe. But no, this area was covered in all sorts of different creatures. And these creatures did not look friendly. Not only did they have two of these, whatever in the hell they were, seemingly as guard dogs, as they immediately turned towards us and charged, but inside was a sort of swine-ish type creature. It looked somewhere halfway between a warthog, a rhino, and Satan's asshole. And they squealed in some sort of strange language, waving towards us. And we wasted no time. We pushed the non-humans out of the way as they seemed to be scared to death of what was in front of them. Those things that came at us were the first ones to fall. And then those warthog, whatever in the hell they were, came charging at us with some sort of axe or blade or something. And we made short work of them too. But now I was beginning to worry. I was down, loading my last full magazine in. I got 15 shots here, plus one, and a couple left in that other magazine. Now what the hell am I going to do? I screamed out, "Ammo check!" for everyone. And everyone was in the same predicament. Most of their ammo was beginning to run dry, and we were worried about what the hell was going on. Eventually, we got to the console, and the non-humans started pressing a whole bunch of buttons and flipping switches and all sorts of whatever in the hell they were doing. All we could do was stand there and wonder what in the flying fuck was going on. And before we knew it, everything lurched in one direction, forcing all of us to be knocked off our feet. A few of us laughed at the idea that we landed on top of each other, but a few others, including myself, did not find it funny, as cracking my head into something hard was not fun. And then we realized something very important, as one man screamed it out. "We're on a ship! How in the hell are we on a ship?" We turned back to where we came, and many of us looked, as another female screamed out, "That was the mountain! How's the mountain on a ship? They didn't... Oh God! Oh God!" And she began to freak out entirely. That is when we saw several more of the warthog type whatever they were, accompanied by some sort of insectoid, I guess you could say. It looked like a praying mantis on all sorts of steroids and LSD. At least you would think we were on LSD, considering the amount of colors that were coming off this thing. We didn't understand what was going on. We really didn't. All we knew is that those that had pulled us out of stasis were screeching and swearing, I'm guessing, as they pointed over, trying desperately to get the bulkhead to close. I guess they have their own doors that were designed to take hits, but they couldn't get anything to work. Everything started moving and shaking as whatever in the hell ship we were on seeming trying to change course. We decided to take the fight to whatever these were. Everyone started screaming at each other to take defensive positions, and we did as best we could. Those things, whatever they were, charged at us with open maws, and we began to fire as fast as we could, taking down 1, 2, 3, 4 at a time. They kept dropping like flies, but unfortunately a few of them began to drop in amongst us. We didn't realize they could climb like that. Suddenly, it's a three-dimensional fight as we're pointing in all different directions, trying desperately not to shoot each other as these things drop in and start swinging at us. And that's when we found out something interesting. One swung at one of the guys who only had a blade. He held up his arms to defend himself, and you heard a crack. But that wasn't the crack of him. The arms of this thing that is swung around had hit him and snapped clean, as though a prize fighter who was a featherweight just tried to kick a heavyweight and broke his tibia or something like that. It was insane. We all just seemed to pause, friendly and enemy alike, as the thing seemingly stopped and couldn't believe what was going on, and then screeched up to the heaven in pain. The man that he assaulted simply had his knife and drove it straight into this thing's torso. He raised his hands up, and even the blunted end of his knife was coming right through the rib cage. You could hear them cracking and popping as he went up. He twisted the knife and yanked it out so violently that blood, gore, and intestines followed. He then drew back, whipped his knife back around, and came down hard straight into the chest, and then with both hands grabbed it and yanked it down as hard as he could, cutting both lacerations together, causing the intestines, the heart, the liver, and everything else to simply spill onto the ground all over his boots. And the monster just dropped to its knees, lowered its head, and slowly slumped forward. This caused the enemy to stop cold, at least for a moment. Then they screeched something, and the last of those, whatever in the hell they were, came charging at us, their narrow heads opening up, trying desperately to bite onto us, only biting onto one, but seemingly could only get through the cloth and barely even making a scratch. The woman that it grabbed a hold of screamed and then pulled her pistol to the side, and then blam, 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 fired again and again into the creature's head. The creature was only holding on for a few more seconds before the body went limp, and with that, we simply got up and took the fight to those warthog-faced sons of bitches. We charged straight at them. They came at us with those blades, and we crashed into them at full speed, seemingly able to pick up speed 2 and 3 times faster than they could. They seemingly were scared as we started not shooting them, but beating them, because we had started to run out of ammo. I put my pistol away as I didn't want to accidentally use any more ammo. Clicking the safety in place and buttoning it in, I just went whole hog on these hogs. Grabbing one and was able to lift it up. The damn thing stood maybe 5'6", 5'7". Looked chunky monkey to me, but he went up, and I'm like, wait a minute, you weigh less than my niece. What the hell? And I simply threw him over the railing, and down he went, squealing that strange sound the entire way to the floor, and then splat. And as the battle finally ended, we looked over to those we had just saved, and then walked over, just calmly as all. So, you want to tell us what's going on now? They still couldn't understand anything we said, but they had a small device in front of them. They simply stopped and looked at it, and then showed it to their friends, and then they said something into it. It changed a little bit. Then, coming from there in a strange mechanical voice, "Thank you How did you do that? We were all confused. Apparently, this was some sort of translator. They couldn't understand our language right now, but apparently this machine could. Simply put, one of the women stepped forward and said, "So, you mind telling us what the fuck is going on here?" We wanted to get an answer, but by the time the translation had actually changed over to their language, something else happened. We all turned around when we heard the huge thud, and as we did, we saw something else. This was not one of the narrow-faced ones. This was not some sort of piglet or whatever the hell you want to call those warthog-faced things. No. This thing was different. This thing had huge multiple tails. Several tentacles came out from its torso. Long, thick limbs that ended in claws. And I looked up at its reptilian face. Its forelegs seemed to stretch across as they grabbed onto any piece of metal that was within reach. And without skipping a beat, one of the guys next to me said, "Oh, fuck me sideways."